Tonight, another day of protests despite warnings from the president.
If a city or state refuses to take the actions that are necessary to defend the life and property of their residents, then I will deploy the United States military.
The latest on the continuing calls for justice for George Floyd and the black community in America. Plus,
because there hasn't been a national strategy, each of us has developed our own re-engagement strategies.
as states figure out the best way to phase their reopenings, governors testified before a House committee about how they are fighting the pandemic in their states. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Cities across the country are gearing up for another night of protests. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm Eric Phillips. Tonight, the state of Minnesota has filed civil rights charges against the Minneapolis Police Department. The move comes more than a week after George Floyd died in their custody, sparking nationwide protests. Many demonstrators have already faced clashes with police. Now President Trump says he'll use the military to restore order if he has to. Faith Nation anchor Jenna Browder has more in tonight's top story.
We're seeing the racial unrest in America play out from coast to coast. A lot of these protests are peaceful, but many of them are turning into violent riots. In St. Louis, buildings were set on fire, then 4 police officers shot as this crowd tried to storm police headquarters.
Some coward fired shots at officers, and now we have 4 in the hospital. But thankfully, and thank God, they're alive.
In Seattle, riots broke out after hours of peaceful protesting, the crowd throwing rocks and fireworks at cops. On the Las Vegas Strip, a police officer on life support after a gunshot to the head. And in Buffalo, 2 officers were hit by a car, one now in serious condition. In New York City, thousands marched peacefully, although it led way to looting, as Governor Andrew Cuomo announced an 11 p.m. curfew. And in D.C., the city's mayor has set a 7 p.m. curfew. This was the scene outside the White House, while in the Rose Garden.
I am your president of law and order and an ally of all peaceful protesters.
President Trump called on governors to deploy the National Guard and vowed to dispatch the U.S. military if they don't crack down. And then, in a bold, controversial move, he walked from the White House to the damaged historic St. John's Episcopal Church. Secret Service clearing out protesters with tear gas just moments before.
Stay Bible.
The president holding up a Bible before being joined by his team for a photo op. In response, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi quoted scripture about a time to heal. And Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden had this criticism.
Donald Trump has turned this country into a battlefield riven by old resentments and fresh fears. He thinks division helps him. His narcissism has become more important than the nation's well-being that he leads.
Meanwhile, the family of George Floyd is calling for peace. Standing where he died, his brother called for an end to the violence. And last night in Minneapolis, that did help to lighten the situation. For Faith Nation, I'm Jenna Browder.
Jenna, thanks. Joining me now is Bishop Harry Jackson, who is the senior pastor of Hope Christian Church in Beltsville, Maryland. Bishop Jackson, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Eric, for having me.
Absolutely. I want to break down the times that we're in right now into cause and effect and get your thoughts on both. First, the cause. We've seen the disturbing cell phone video involving the deadly arrest of George Floyd, but this is not the first time an incident like this has happened. What do we need to do, and specifically, what does the church need to do to turn this dangerous trend around?
Well, 5 years ago, I brought a group together, Bishop T.D. Jakes, James Robinson, and Christian leaders, about 200 representing 40 million Christians. We had an evening service with about 7,000. And we laid out some things then that we had seen happening in Ferguson, and with much the same scenario. And we began to have criminal justice reform. What we've seen on the TV cameras and on the little miniature cell phone cameras is that there's much more going on in that realm of justice that needs to be addressed. So the cause is legitimate. It's been long-standing. But what has not happened yet, and it may mean that we need to call this kind of meeting again, someone's got to speak, in a sense, in the name of God, to the heart of all our minorities. In a time when blacks are dying because of corona, Hispanics are dying, we still have this kind of external judicial justice pressure that we need to fix. But we need someone to give us hope, and that should come from the church. Then we need structural change that begins to address this. We're not going to solve it in 5 minutes, but we need to do something right away. Unfortunately, when we conflate the two conversations, bam, there's an explosion. So right now, somebody from the church needs to talk to the heart of the nation. I admire part of what President Trump has done. I think we need a sit-down town hall with him about what he has already done. I know his heart is to see everybody safe, and we need to have that conversation separate from what's going to happen with the National Guard or the Army or all that. Both conversations are needed: church, government, and civic involvement, and we've got to get on this right now.
Well, what you're really talking about is the effect that we're seeing from that cause. But there have been other situations like the George Floyd. When you consider the justifiable frustration and the pent-up anger that many people have felt for years, how do you make the case that nonviolence and doing what Jesus would do is the best way to go?
Well, I could look back at Martin Luther King Jr., what he did historically. He had Malcolm X trying to come with violence, and he also had Black Panthers, all these kinds of guys. And then he took the long-term road. He became a martyr. And unfortunately, we may be looking at a martyr right now in Minneapolis, a Christian man who, in a sense, his death put this whole issue on the map, much as Eric Till did back in the original civil rights movement. So again, the church has got to advocate for speaking to the heart, and then we've got to have tangible government solutions. And I think we're going to have to move quickly. We need more whites speaking out and joining in with blacks, advocating for the nonviolent approach. Blowing up cities, rioting, et cetera, is not going to help anybody. So I'm going to set my heart and direction in giving some answers that way. As we did 5 years ago, the end result was criminal justice reform moves, and I believe that we can see greater things happen, and we're going to win this time. Eventually in this cycle, we'll come back around to a moment where we win.
Bishop Jackson, thank you very much for your insights. As always, always appreciate you having you with us.
Thank you very much, Eric.
This afternoon, leaders of the Southern Baptist Convention addressed the death of George Floyd and protests that have followed. Dr. Ronnie Floyd, CEO and president of the SBC Executive Committee, told church leaders SBC members can't stay silent on racism, adding, quote, "We must stand in solidarity with one another. We must continue to work with compassion until justice is served, and we must commit to eradicate racism in all its forms." That's something Bishop Jackson was just talking about. Well, today, President Trump made his second visit to a religious site in less than 24 hours, not in response to protests, but to bring attention to the fight for international religious freedom. He then signed an executive order on the issue. White House correspondent Ben Kennedy has the details.
President Trump called upon the nations of the world to end religious persecution. The executive order even locks down $50 million for programs that advance international religious freedom. President Trump visited a D.C. shrine Tuesday, honoring Pope John Paul II in an effort to focus on international religious freedom.
Because there's so much religious persecution in the world, it also hurts all the other human rights.
Sam Brownback, the ambassador at large for religious freedom, says the executive order is needed now more than ever, as around 80% of the world's population live in countries where religious freedom is threatened, restricted, or banned.
Ambassador Brownback, what kind of impact can this order have?
I think it can be massive. Part of my modeling in this program is wanted to have religious freedom be like the human trafficking issue. That it be one that it embrace everybody and it goes grassroots.
Under the order, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo will develop country-specific action plans for prioritizing religious freedom. To top that, all personnel assigned to positions overseas will now receive international religious freedom training.
To sum it all up is it makes religious freedom, international religious freedom, a whole of government approach on our basic foreign policy apparatus.
Now the executive order comes as Christian persecution and anti-Semitism are on the rise around the world. North Korea, Afghanistan, and Somalia top the list as the most dangerous countries for Christians, according to Open Doors USA. Ben Kennedy, CBN News, the White House.
Ben, thanks. Chief Political Analyst David Brody joining us now with more. And David, religious freedom has been a big focus for this administration. How have you seen that play out in the U.S. as well as around the world?
You're right, Eric. As a matter of fact, we saw it play out firsthand at CBN News when we traveled with the president on that first trip to Saudi Arabia, Jerusalem, and Rome. That was a common theme there. And then, of course, since that time, we've had, especially with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, he's been all over the world talking about religious freedom. And we've had at least 4 to 5, I think it's been 5 interviews with him now talking about it. And indeed, we have those ministerial conferences that the State Department has put together, bringing countries from all over the world together to talk about and to come up with action plans to have a better situation all around the world with religious freedom. So this administration has done quite a bit on paper. We'll see how it translates in the future.
Well, we know that the president has a lot of support among evangelical white Christians, but that isn't the case among many black Christian voters. Do you think his response to the protests across the country could lose him the support he does have from black Christian voters?
Well, I think there's a potential for that, for sure. I thought he missed a golden opportunity at the Rose Garden yesterday when he didn't really mention George Floyd at all. As a matter of fact, I don't believe he actually said George Floyd's name there or at the church there at St. John's Church across from the White House. I thought it was a missed moment by the president, and it's those type of times, of instances that he's going to need to really think about and work on. Now, he's going to say, look, I've delivered for the African-American community. He's going to go with that. But sometimes, as he knows, visuals are important. And also the message you're sending on Twitter and otherwise is also very important, too.
Yeah, words are always important. Less than a minute here. I want to ask you about Joe Biden, who's venturing out of the basement to try to make his impact at this point. Do you think that he's using all of this as an opportunity to do so, and how effective is it?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that Joe Biden is the alternative to Donald Trump. Specifically, what I mean by that, we know he's going to be the alternative, but what I mean by that is Donald Trump not going to wear the mask in public. Joe Biden wearing the mask everywhere he goes. Joe Biden getting down on one knee and kneeling and listening to folks in the church yesterday that he was at. Donald Trump holding up the Bible. It's the Bible, it's the country, it's law and order. So totally two different responses and ways to handle this. And, you know, America is divided. They're going to have to make a choice. But, you know, Joe Biden, it's interesting to watch Joe Biden because normally he would be a little bit more like Trump in the sense of more aggressive and kind of a rabble raiser. But, you know, he's really not doing much of that. He's trying to be more of the consoler in chief. But Biden really has a bit of a wild side to him, if you will, a little bit more Trump in him. But that's not really coming through because he's going up against Trump. So it's hard to do.
Absolutely. CBN Chief Political Analyst David Brody, our thanks to you.
Thanks.
Coming up, the cost of the COVID outbreak in America. New government projections. Next on Faith Nation.
Hey,
Hey, if you're tired and exhausted all day, you can't think clearly, and you really just need a cup or even a pot of coffee to get through your day, then join me, Dr. Josh Axe, for this new series where I'm going to teach you how to transform your diet and use essential oils and supplements to get a better night's sleep.
Wake up to your best life. Call 1-800-700-7000 to get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
It's about the competition.
I kind of put that pressure on myself, and I think people had expectations.
It's about overcoming.
We use this phrase all the time, keep chopping, keep practicing hard.
It's about going the distance.
You know, I think as a father, it's my job, to lead. Just be the best husband and father I can be.
Watch Going the Distance with Sean Brown Saturday night at 7:30 on the CBN News Channel.
Orphans Promise is committed to loving and serving at-risk children, to helping keep families together, and to creating opportunities for strong and sustainable communities around the world. We're working in over 60 countries around the world, and with your help, we can do even more. There's an old African proverb I love that says, if you want to run fast, run alone. But if you want to run far, run together. At Orphans Promise, we want to run far so we can touch the lives of as many orphaned and vulnerable children as possible. But we don't want to go alone. We're out to change the world, one child, one family, one community at a time. Will you join us?
$7.9 trillion. That's how much the coronavirus could cost the United States. The new projection from the Congressional Budget Office looks at the cost of the pandemic over the next decade. Meanwhile, as states phase in reopening, the number of those facing the disease is growing at a slower pace in much of the country. Still, there have been more than 1,820,000 confirmed cases and more than 105,000 deaths. Over on Capitol Hill today, House members on the Energy and Commerce Committee held a virtual hearing with the governors from 3 states. They wanted to know what the states need from the federal government in order to reopen. Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson has been following the hearing. And Abby, what was the goal of today's hearing?
Well, Eric, a lot of the goal was to figure out what's working and what's not, and what states need to do as they start trying to safely reopen. And another thing that was discussed was, without a vaccine, what is going to happen over the next couple of months as these states reopen. And 2 of the 3 governors that we heard from today are from Democrat states. And they were pretty critical of the Trump administration for what they say is a lack of national testing strategy that's really just hurting their planning as they're trying to reopen their states. Take a look.
If federal supplies could be allocated more quickly, with a detailed breakdown in advance and shipped at a regular cadence, we would be able to hit our goals and ensure that we prevent a second wave. Absent a vaccine or cure, tracing and testing are the foundation of a COVID-19 response. Throughout much of April, our state averaged about 5,000 tests a day. Now we've reached almost our 15,000 a day, with our real goal being 30 tests a day, 30,000 tests a day.
Governor Whitmer says that there's been a lot of inconsistency in what the federal government has told her is coming to her state as far as supplies and tests goes, and what they have actually received, which is making it very hard for her to plan a strategy as she starts reopening her state.
Certainly a lot of criticism coming from the governor of Michigan, but the committee also heard from Republican Governor Asa Hutchinson of Arkansas, who never issued a stay-at-home order. Why was that?
You know, this was interesting. And he basically said that for him, what he was most concerned about was the number of hospital beds and making sure that if they had an outbreak, that the hospitals will be able to handle that. And he said that in Arkansas, they never really had a very large outbreak. So there wasn't ever that concern for him that their hospitals would be overrun and not be able to handle the amount of people coming in. And so he said when he saw these states issuing the stay-at-home orders, he said for him, flattening the curve is really, it's not about bringing the number of cases to zero, but it's making sure that those first responders can handle the amount of cases in the state. And since they never had that problem, he never issued that shelter in place, that stay-at-home order, but they did practice safe social distancing. Take a look.
But our decision for our state in not issuing a shelter-in-place order was in combination with our public health team, and we believe it was the right direction for our state. My public health team advised that a stay-at-home order would not significantly slow the spread of COVID, and I knew a stay-at-home order would cost thousands more Arkansans their jobs and possibly cause more businesses to close permanently. Instead, we doubled down on our message that encouraged Arkansans to follow social distancing guidelines, to wash their hands often and well, and to wear masks in public. I trusted the citizens of my state with good information to act responsibly in their personal choices, and they did. There's always a few outliers.
And as a result, his state has fared relatively well compared to others. But again, they never had the numbers that other states were seeing. Back to you, Eric.
Certainly a tale of two states, Abby. Thanks. Fighting on the coronavirus front lines. Meet a nurse who traveled an unusual route to New York to help the hard-hit state. You're watching Faith Nation.
Daddy?
Yeah, buddy?
How many nickels are in a dollar?
There are 20 nickels in a dollar.
How do birds fly? Does milk really make my bones stronger?
Yeah.
Daddy, when we die, will we go to heaven?
Do you have the answer to life's biggest question? Call the 700 Club. We'll help you find answers to the important questions life brings your way.
Watch breaking news, in-depth exclusive stories and programs from health to entertainment you won't find anywhere else. The CBN News Channel, a perspective you can trust. Enjoy credible news reporting from around the world. Discover inspiring programs and stories of hope, all in one place from a Christian perspective. The CBN News Channel, a perspective you can trust. To watch the CBN News Channel, download the app or visit cbnnewschannel.com.
Hello, I'm Dr. David Perlmutter, board-certified neurologist and #1 New York Times bestselling author. Wouldn't it be great to boost your energy, eliminate brain fog, and even reverse brain disease? Well, you can, and I'm going to show you how, along with some of the world's most well-respected brain experts in this DVD, Protect Your Brain.
Get Protect Your Brain, a free DVD only from the Christian Broadcasting Network, featuring experts on the cutting edge of neuroscience and brain health.
No matter how many times you've failed in the past, you really can do this.
In Protect Your Brain, you'll discover simple strategies to keep your brain young and healthy. Improve your memory. Discover the gut-brain connection. In Protect Your Brain, get your free copy at cbn.com or call 1-800-700-7000.
If you want to improve the quality of your life, get the DVD Protect Your Brain and get it today.
Like many healthcare workers, nurse Rachel Hartley has responded to the urgent need created by the pandemic, traveling from Virginia to New York in a slightly unusual fashion to do so.
It wasn't a leisurely vacation, Sale, I'll tell you that. And it was just a big leap to mobilize and to take that step of faith.
And without much hesitation, Rachel and her husband jumped into the deep end, almost literally.
It didn't take but 10 seconds before we were both kind of
full bore.
Rachel was working as a pre-op nurse in Lynchburg, Virginia, when attention shifted to the pandemic. As elective surgeries were canceled, she wasn't really busy. Around that time, recruiters started calling to see if Rachel would be interested in helping in New York, especially since she had worked as an intensive care nurse.
And I think the Lord just really put on my heart, like, I've prepared you for this. You have the skills, the training necessary. You're not being utilized where you are. You should go.
After quitting her job, things began to fall into place. After hearing Rachel's story, a New York marina waived its $10,000 monthly rental fee. That's when she, her husband, and a friend set sail up the eastern seaboard. They felt it would be safer than flying, plus they could live on the boat and host other medical workers in need of housing.
Especially in the middle of a pandemic, just in looking at places to rent and whatnot up here, we were thinking how special it would be to have our own place, for sanity and just for cleanliness sake.
Looking back, the 34-hour trip that landed them in New York on Easter Sunday may have been the easy part compared to NYU Langone Hospital in Brooklyn.
Things, especially in the hospital, were just chaotic. There were so many patients, so many people dying, and it was just a really tough environment to walk into. I tried to prepare for mentally, but it's something you just can't really prepare for until you actually see it with your own eyes.
I was underprepared, especially in the beginning of their tenure, for how they were going to be emotionally handling the time in the hospital.
They say one thing has made the difference: God's grace.
The unending grace that he gives so I can give my patients, and the love so I can give my patients. If I get sick, Lord willing, I'll probably be okay. But even if I'm not okay, no matter what happens, to God be the glory.
I'm very proud of her humility in that act of service and her willingness to take that on. We're here because we believe that God has us on this planet to be disciple makers.
I am Region's first ROTC graduate student.
Meet the pastors who are preaching the gospel in a fresh, fearless way. I'm Roberto Torres-Cedillo. Join me each week for Next Gen Voices. And watch God transform a generation.
How'd you like to get a redo on your health, on your body, on your arteries, so you could have the energy you had 20 years ago? The great news is you can. I'm Dr. Mike Roizen, chair of the Wellness Institute at the Cleveland Clinic. I've written 4 New York Times bestsellers. But even better than having to read all that, you can listen to this DVD and watch it. Protect your heart? Yes, you can. Here's how.
Go to CBN.com or call 1-800-700-7000 for your free copy of Protect Your Heart. Let the medical experts show you their new discoveries on how to avoid heart disease and even reverse it. Easy steps to uncover the hidden dangers in your medicine cabinet, reduce stress, and get a complete do-over for your health. Call 1-800-700-7000. That's 1-800-700-7000. Or go to CBN.com to claim your free copy of Protect Your Heart.
8 states and Washington, D.C. are holding primary elections today. Be sure to join us back here tomorrow night for all the results right here on Faith Nation. In the meantime, have a great evening. We'll see you then.